Hello, it's me again, it's Bill, and I'm not going to go through the material this week unless you get in touch with me and tell me that you would like me to talk to you about how to handle any of the material in the chapter that you're studying now. I sort of want to try and make this light. As you know, I don't try and give you anything more than what you've got because I feel you've got enough to go on with all that you have to do with watching the DVD and then looking at the grammar and then perhaps using the flashcards and working through the workbook and doing all that within the context of all the other things that you're doing. So I just try and be there and be a sort of a... I learned this at the University of Phoenix a long time ago. They don't like lecturing. They call the lecturer the sage on the stage, and they don't like that. What they like is facilitation. And the facilitation that they use is they use the cliche, the guide on the side. So as opposed to the sage on the stage, the lecturer, they have the guide on the side. Okay, so I'm hopefully to you the facilitator or the guide on the side, so I can help when anything comes up. I want to just be a bit light today in the sense of, those of us who study Greek, we like to sort of... the danger is later on when you're actually preaching or doing a Bible class or talking to somebody is that you want to, in a sense, show off your Greek. You want to say, hey, well, this comes from the Greek with so-and-so, so-and-so. And I've worked on the basis through the years that people are just not interested. And that's okay because they shouldn't be interested either. You know, what you need to do is just cut to the chase, which is what it means, and then explain it in English. But for those of us who study Greek, then there are sort of what I call ingroup jokes. And I heard this joke 35 years ago when I was studying Greek for the first time myself, and I showed you my original book by John Wenham. I was studying that book, and the lecturer made a joke. He'd been educated in England, and he talked about an Oxford Don. The word Don means someone who's a professor at Oxford University. And apparently, before I do that, let me back off slightly. And let me just give you just the principal parts of the verb sozo, which is I say, as you know. Sozo, so it's a dental, so the stem ends in a delta. And so sozo is the present indicative active. The future, then, the dental drops out with a sigma there before a sigma, so it's so. And then the aorist is with the augment at the beginning. You're just learning that now, but with an augment that tells you it's a past tense, so it's so-sa. The ending's different. You're learning new endings now, elusa, and so forth. That's aorist active, and that's very important. Aorist is a very, very important tense for us to know. And then sesoka, in other words, then the sigma is reduplicated with the augment, so therefore you know it's perfect, and especially in the perfect active, you will learn that it has a kappa in it, as I mentioned last week. So that's the perfect active, and then the perfect passive is same thing with the reduplication of the sigma, the consonant, sesos, my. I can't really tell you why that sigma is in there before the my, except that it must be, obviously there's a dental that was there, in other words, in the stem, and then the stem would be there. So I think what happened, it elided through time. In other words, what you'd have is the dental stem, sesod, and then my. So you have mu with preceded by a delta. And I think that probably just elided to a sigma from that standpoint. In other words, through time. But I haven't got any further information on that in respect to where to go in it. But I can tell you, obviously, when it comes to the aorist passive, you've got the augment again, and then you've got it's sothane. In other words, that theta that's in there, as you know, if you have tau or delta or a theta add plus a sigma, then those three consonants, those dentals drop out, and it's sigma. So in other words, in this particular case, so the ending of the delta drops out, and what you have is a theta because that's part of the ending of the aorist passive. All right, so some of this you've not come across yet, but I have to send out. So you've got the principal parts of sozo. So here's what happened. The Oxford Don goes into a brethren meeting place. He wanders in there, whatever, one day, a brethren church, and he's listening to an evangelistic sermon. And the preacher's walking up and down, and he's talking, and then by chance, he happens to come right next to where the Oxford Don was, and he says to the Oxford Don, "Are you saved, brother?" And the story goes, the Oxford Don said to him, "Do you mean sotsomai, sothesomai, esotsamain, esothane, or sisomai?" In other words, he was saying, what exactly are you talking about here? Are you saying I am saved? Do you mean sotsomai, which is present passive, I am being saved? Or do you mean future passive, we will come across this, sothesomai, I will be saved at the final day? Or do you mean imperfect passive, esothamane, I was being saved, or I was being saved, or I was saved? Or do you mean aorist passive, esothane, I was saved? Or do you mean perfect passive, sesosmai, I have been saved? So in other words, when the I won't say illiterate, but when the brethren preacher says, "Are you saved, brother?" the Oxford Don answers back with this host of principal parts from the verb sozo, which is a very, very poignant point. In other words, he's saying, what do you mean by this when you say I am saved? Because that is a good Protestant interpretation, but not necessarily Catholic, obviously, or an Orthodox interpretation. In fact, a while ago, I became very interested in the Orthodox Church, and I explored it, and I reached a point where it appealed to me a lot, because there's elements of Protestantism that are problematic to me, and sometimes if you want me to, I can explain all that. But the Orthodox Church appealed to me, but at the end of the day, I couldn't go along with it for two reasons. One was the focus on Mary, in terms of what I'd call her ability to be able to be some sort of a mediatrix before God through Jesus Christ, based on the Second Council of Ephesus in 451. Couldn't go along with that. And the other element was the icons. I couldn't go along with the iconography as a representation. So icons are very important, through which a window in which you can contact God through Jesus Christ, etc. It smacked to me too much, in my view, of idolatry. So I couldn't go along with that. But I liked what I heard. I went again, it was an Oxford professor who's a Orthodox theologian. I found it on YouTube. His name's Callistus Ware. And he talked about this notion of being saved. And his answer to it was this, I am in the process of being saved. And that covers then all those verbal forms that Oxford Don said reputedly. I don't know whether he said that or not, but isn't it a brilliant thing when someone comes up and says, "Are you saved, brother?" And then you marshal off all these Greek forms, because the point is extremely complicated. In other words, you're saved in the past, but you're being saved now. In other words, we're talking about a passive sense. We're not talking about active. I am saved by Christ at a particular point in time in the past, conversion, but then I have to live the Christian life. And so I am being saved in that process. Or I could could we say in a sense, I was saved. I was saved, but here you've got imperfect passive in the sense almost like an aorist passive. In other words, a point in the time, not necessarily continuous. Or well, I don't think you could say I was in the process of being saved. I think you just say I was saved. Or you could say, I will be saved in the future as I am faithful to God. Is that simply an Arminian standpoint? Those of you who are Calvinists, surely you've got to say the same thing, because your notion of perseverance is dependent upon, your notion of election is based upon your perseverance. Only those who are elect will persevere. So to know that you're elect, you have to persevere. So you can say, I will be saved, but that's dependent upon your faithfulness now, all right? Or you could say, the perfect passive, I have been saved. The perfect, that's right, perfect passive. I have been saved, meaning I have been saved in the past. Up to this point is where I am, but what's going to happen tomorrow? Well, those of us who are Arminians, I'm an Arminian, then says that today is the day of salvation, and I will seek to be in the process of my salvation. And of course, then you could use, now I'm going to the last one, which is aorist passive. I was saved. At a point in time in the past, say, not a singular element. That's generally how I start looking at the aorist when I think of it. So I was saved, and here I am now. So it's really quite complicated, isn't it? Because it also relates to the Protestant-Catholic divide. In other words, then, is justification something that's separate from sanctification, a la James chapter 2. In other words, you read Romans 3 and Romans 4 in conjunction with reading James, so that sanctification is some sort of secondary act, so to speak. Naturally, so to speak, I said, that's tied in then to the element of this is what it's like to be justified because you live this way. In other words, I'll use Martin Luther, a phrase that I learned from Luther a long time ago. Genuine faith is pregnant with good works, James 2. So then your sanctification is part of this whole process of justification. Or is it that justification by itself stands its own ground? So I am saved, full stop. You see, that's the ultimate Protestant standpoint, which doesn't work obviously in the Catholic notion, because the idea of being sanctified, the process, is part of the justification. All right? And that's true in the Orthodox Church too, which is why Callistus Ware, I think, says, I'm in the process of being saved. You know something? I'm somewhere between that. I'm more towards that perspective than the singular, I'm justified by faith, now I have salvation, if you died tonight, brother, etc. This kind of business. To me, this is a serious business, and it's a lifelong business. Now, I'll drop it from there and just say to you, isn't that fascinating, based upon the principal parts of just this one verb, what we got into? And as an in-group Greek student, I kind of like that. The Oxford Don in there. Are you saved, brother? Grabs him by the collar. Well, do you mean sotsomai, esotsomain, sothesomai, esothane, or sesosmai? I wonder what the brethren guy, the preacher, said in response to that. Well, maybe he said he was speaking in tongues. I don't know. Anyway, have a good week, and let me know if I can help you in any way.